Good morning. Today is Wednesday or Tuesday. It's the first here in New Zealand, and this is the SIG Architecture Conformance Office Hours meeting. I am Hippie Hecker, your host, and this meeting is being recorded live, and we have a code of conduct that we all adhere to. Uh, Rather than go through we'll do some quick shout outs to Aaron. Thank you so much for caring about the watch, chilling enough to put a PR forth. So looking forward to going through that with you. And Liggett, Smack, constantly adding new endpoints with conformance tests. This is exactly how it should go. And I'm so excited to do this. Then we scroll down to the bottom real quickly to cover an item here. Future behaviorless conformance changes. John, you're on.
Thank you very much for letting me jump the line there. Aaron and Jeffrey and I were talking last week, and I wanted to see what everybody thinks. We feel like the work that we've been doing towards the behavior-based stuff and that whole cap is really not progressing in the way that we want, and for a couple of reasons. And the original goals of that were around separating out the set of reviewers and sort of having a punch list and a few other things. And the problems it was trying to solve don't seem to necessarily be the problems we're having and in velocity. And as we go to actually take the existing tests and try to map them into that model, there's an incredible amount of technical debt and work that would need to be done in order to make that work. And it just doesn't seem like, to use a cliche, it doesn't seem like the juice is worth the squeeze on that one. And so we're thinking we should abandon that cap, and instead we'll keep the conformance YAML that we have, but we'll pull the behaviors pieces out. And one of the things, we have another follow-on cap that was based on that work for profiles, but we talked about some alternative ways we could do profiles that were simpler and wouldn't have to have that dependency on that work. And Aaron's going to talk some more about those later. So I wanted to raise that here and get people's opinion, and then we can decide what to do with it.
Excellent. Thank you for that work on that, John, and your team. It's good to have diverse discussions on different approaches. I know that this community values trying multiple things at the same time so that we come down to the best solution overall.
Yep.
Yeah. So one thought I had for a potential, something we could maybe try going forward if we get there, is we wanted to be able to use behaviors to specify what functionality we knew we wanted to cover but hadn't yet been covered. And I think that we could use pending, the pending verb from the Ginkgo DSL for that. So it's a test that's marked with a slightly different status, and that would allow us to know that those tests, those are tests that we have agreed we want implemented, but they haven't been implemented yet. It's just a thought. There's no plan for that going forward at the moment, but if we find we're at a place where the API-based coverage, API-based coverage that you're using to guide what tests you next write isn't working anymore, we can try a different approach.
Yeah, I think if we do that, we'll need some conventions around that they're pending conformance tests, not just pending tests, and that therefore there sort of is some indication that these are important functions we think should be part of the conformance suite, even if we haven't done them yet. I mean, we've been doing that with issues, right? That's Hippie, your team's been tracking those with issues, and that's another way too. It's just not in tree.
It's not in tree, and it's only used for people on this call and this flow. It would be great, no matter what approach we use, whether it's in tree or out of tree, for us to have a community-wide process that is adoptable, not enforced, but just a way to flow that brings us to the same page together.
So I guess if there are no objections, then what I'll do is when I get back next week, I will put together something that abandons that cap and a PR, and then we'll just let people object on there which is unlikely to happen if nobody hears objecting.
Thank
All
you,
right.
John.
That's all I've got. Aaron's got control for the profile stuff later. And thank you all. And I will see you all next time. All right.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
That's good.
Good
Enjoy your
job.
time, John.
Since you're on the call, Aaron, thank you very much for the direct guidance and very clear PR. That we feel the love on that one, and it's really appreciated. For our open discussion section now, we've got some different points. Zach is going to have this first area about a PR open to KK. I'm going to open up that link and yield the floor to Zach.
Hello, hello. Yeah, so this is, I guess, just a prompt discussion. The idea is to take the output from API Snoop and convert it into a JSON or a YAML that we can put into conformance test data. It would show the endpoints according to the most recent Open API spec and whether or not they're tested and whether or not they're conformance tested. And this would allow a couple things, mainly ways to see coverage using endpoints as a metric without having to use API Snoop, the web app. So you can just do simple JQ scripts to see what the current coverage would be. It would also mean that different apps, whether it's API Snoop or a Prowl bot or what have you, would be able to compare coverage without having to have its own database or processing power itself. It would just be taking a look at the JSON and comparing it to the latest results, or taking a look at the JSON throughout its commit history to see progress over time and so on. And yeah, this is the example of it. I can go over how it's generated, but it's basically we combine the Open API spec with all the audit events from a test run and load it into a Postgres database. And then just for every endpoint in the spec, see whether or not a user agent hits it where the user agent has the E2E string in it, and whether or not it has a conformance tag in it. This lets us see, as being highlighted here, not just the endpoint and whether or not it's tested, but also the exact tests that hit it.
Okay, so I feel like Lubomir's comment on the PR was around, so what would keeping this file up to date look like?
What I would imagine is we would have a action set up so that for every commit or for specifically tagged commits, we would run the Postgres job, which it simply would create a database, run the processing, output JSON and commit that, or output JSON or YAML and commit that to this folder.
One of the things that the reason I asked Zach to put this together was we're trying to put together a gate that says you can't have these new endpoints unless they have tests. And that will become this tooling, and not necessarily in the exact way. This is just an example, start a discussion. But when we have endpoints, this being at a minimum, the key being in a hash, the endpoint itself or the operation ID, and then the values being the list of tests that hit it. And that could probably reduce the size of it. I noticed off a glance, it's about 1.9 meg, and we don't need to replicate necessarily the structure, complete structure. of OpenAPI JSON because it's already there. But we do kind of want to know that very clearly at the time of the PR that this endpoint, that there's a diff. It's really clear that this endpoint in this particular PR is hitting a new, and that this test is hitting a new endpoint.
Right.
And ideally, like right now, the way that Zach has this set up is it's sort of inside a container by itself that uses Postgres. So it's a container. It would be part of a proud job that might run as a comment that produces a PR against their own branch or their own org saying, just a suggestion that now that this is, I don't know exactly where it fits in the process when they don't run the tool itself as part of their PR, when they adjust tests. So ideally, if you're writing a test or you're promoting endpoints or changing that, you would run this tool to update this conformance coverage file.
So I will admit I'm torn here because I appreciate the effort you've put in, and I can see it's been thought through. The hesitance I have is I'm trying to see, I can talk more about this when I talk about profiles. I'm trying to see if there's a way for us to maybe get some data like this out of tree instead of sticking to it in tree. That's the first point. Second point is this looks an awful lot like we're starting to like gate on API coverage, which though John just discussed how we think we're not interested in doing the behavior-based approach. I'm still not sure that API coverage is something that we are interested in gating on. So if the idea here is to enforce that a feature is not allowed to go GA unless it has conformance tests, I feel like, I could be totally wrong here, that generally the set of people who have approver powers to like allow something to promote from beta to V1 and go GA are aware that like there should be conformance tests as part of this. This is something I think that's kind of being baked into the production readiness review as part of the CAP process. And so I would anticipate that like humans would catch this as part of the existing release process. Although I can like really appreciate the trust but verify aspect of allowing like a tool to verify this for us, I'm not sure it's worth the cost of putting it in tree. So rather than like gating to it too tightly though, I think it would be useful to have this as like another consumable artifact from API Snoop, whether that is, hitting API Snoop's API or looking at Git, maybe it's stored in API Snoop's Git repo or something, so we can sort of periodically compare that against where the Kubernetes tree is at. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And that's good feedback.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah.
Some of that will kind of flow into the next point, which is also around Zach's work on API Snoop itself.
Okay.
I'll go up the page. This is, and Zach, apologies if this isn't the most recent version. This is the link I have available. If I need something else, just
Yeah, no worries. And what we're seeing here, looks largely the same, but this is pulling from that JSON that we just showed. This is actually taken from our own repo, and so not from Kubernetes, but it's using the same output file.
Right.
The main difference, so the Sunburst is working the same. Main largest differences is that the routes are now based off of the release instead of, it used to be built around buckets and jobs, but that was hard to be able to like know the exact place you're trying to go to. It's much simpler to just type in 1.18 or 1.19. We also now have multiple pages, specifically the conformance progress, which is showing the stable endpoints and their conformance coverage over time. So a couple different graphs to help illustrate that, and then would include documentation and about page, which would give better info around where this data is coming from, what we mean by like stable endpoints and eligible endpoints, why we're tracking this, etc. Right now, that's just a placeholder, but this is the basic idea.
Yeah, this looks great. There is a part of me that feels like it sure would be great if we had something that was more granular than by release, so that we could track our progress a little more tightly. I know like we're kind of in a situation right now where the progress is slow enough that there's not a ton of value like checking in on it every week. And so if we accept that and just say like checking in every release is when it's worth it, I get that. But I still think it's sometimes helpful to understand like these release cycles take, you know, the one we're in now is taking maybe up to 4 months. So it'd be useful to have some sense while we're in the middle of a 3 to 4 month cycle of whether or not we are headed in the right direction. But I think this is a great starting point. Like it could be that what might give us that additional granularity is if we went not just off of the .0 releases, but also off of the like alpha and beta versions that are cut during the release cycle.
Aaron, I want to make sure I understand you on that. Conformance and the tests themselves are cut at the beginning of the .0 release. And it's my understanding that they don't change past that, particularly the conformance text and the test. And if you look at what's happened, like in the current release, it'll be the stuff between when 1.18.0 was cut and the progress we're making on 1.19.0, what we pictured here. So that big swath of light green is new tested. Yay, we're having new endpoints come in with conformance tests. Super happy about that. But the green rise above the left from the prior release is the work that is new. It's the debt getting paid off. And I don't know that it would be beneficial because there's not, once we've gotten here, it's all focused on the current release. Do you mean to see over the course of time between 1.17 and 1.18? Because it's, I don't think
no, I think it's more like 1.19 hasn't been cut yet. So maybe like, I think you're right. Like, I think probably just viewing it by release is probably good enough. This only becomes a problem if we start moving more quickly. And even then, I don't think it's that much of a problem. But like, to get snapshots of where we were at, like at the start of June and at the start of May, right? To sort of see if our progress during this release life cycle is still steady. But
the interesting data points here, I think, are those PRs that touch Swagger JSON.
Yeah.
That touch GA. And the PRs that touch any tests that affect our coverage on those. And that's where the gate, that's where we're trying to, you know, this is the tool we have. It doesn't necessarily need to be a hard gate, but having it suggest, hi, I noticed you added some alpha. The process for going through that, just so you know, and it's automated, let you know, here's the progress you're gonna need, no stress. Beta, same comment. Hey, I've noticed you've added some new beta stuff. Here's the process. Hey, I've noticed you went into alpha. We're not gonna deny this, but just so you know, here's the process that your local, your approvers and the reviewers are gonna be looking for in order for this to be approved. And it's there in the PR as a gentle, straightforward reminder that this shouldn't pass.
I hear that. I feel like, again, that's something I would expect to be communicated through the KEP review process. But yeah, this like, I agree. This is a great way of showing the progress that we have made while evaluating while like adding conformance tests and promoting conformance tests.
Zach,
And
did you say anything about the yellow?
No. Yeah, so in this graph, the yellow represents the moments when new endpoints were added to that release and they came in untested. So you can see at the point at which it became a commitment in 1.16 that new endpoints come in with conformance tests, that got much better. But before then, and that also means that a lot of, that's why you see the dark green tested is increasing higher than just the light green.
Yes.
It's showing that a lot of the tests are being written for endpoints that were released several versions ago because they came in without endpoints. So that should ideally decrease, like we shouldn't have to be writing, we'll be able to catch up on a kind of a static number because all new endpoints are coming in with tests, ideally.
Yeah, I think this looks great.
And that is something we could in the, like for the sunbursts when switching between releases. These are just static graphs. The sunburst is the one where you can look, specifically at 1.18 or 1.19, etc. And that is one where we could have the one of the releases available is like 1.19 alpha, 1.19 beta. The problem that I was facing was like having too much noise. Like if we updated per commit or, for every test run. And so then you're choosing between buckets and jobs. Like it was hard to get like meaning from it, easy meaning from it. But knowing the rate at which, like the cutoff points that someone would want to look at when looking at the past releases, I would be keen to know.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, for me, I think wanting to see more granular data about our velocity kind of only makes sense if we're moving fast enough for that to matter. So if I cared to compare where we were at now versus where we were at when whatever the last alpha or beta release candidate was cut, like evaluating it more frequently. But I think just kind of sort of continually refreshing where we are now in 119 and comparing that against where we were when 118 was cut is probably proof enough for us to know that like things are going up, and they're going up, by so much in comparison to other release cycles.
Cool. Thank you for the feedback.
Yeah.
Zach had another graph. Do you want me to speak to that, Zach, or
What's it?
the second graph?
Oh, yeah. So the second graph is showing the endpoints released in a version and the amount of them that are still untested. So the red is the still untested. So 1.16 and 1.19 both look like 1.9 before we were able to see endpoint coverage and before we had the new endpoints come in with conformance tests. You'll see that a number of them are still untested compared to 1.19 where there are no untested new endpoints, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is great. I mean, for me, this naturally leads me to ask, like, okay, so where's the list of those endpoints? Let's sort them by release. So we hit the most recent ones first, because that seems pretty egregious, and we'll work our way back. Or maybe we want to work from the earliest. I don't know, but like this is cool.
Sweet. Yeah, and this is the it's the service level of work where we are continually reducing the maintenance size of that Postgres run that we're doing. So getting like the list of still untested endpoints sorted by release is much, much simpler now. It's just a basic SQL query.
Right. Cool.
As we reduce this down to just being that container, Aaron, that means anybody can pretty much just run that container and bring it up and have that database to query, or in this case, just the output YAML that is used to make these websites.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it'll be interesting to see how we can bring that into some tooling, out of tree or not, to guide us.
Yeah, agreed.
One thing that I'd like to ask I guess, of Aaron and Srini while you're here is, are we happy with this new approach, of course, to what our website is now? And so when we're confident in those numbers that they're matching up and everything, should we go ahead and flip that over to be the new site, or is there any more feedback that you want to put into that before we use that as an update? My hope, and I'm not, we'll have to see if we can make sure that the numbers are adding up, that we could do that sometime in the next week or so, hopefully for the meeting. But I don't want to promise that without being real confident in it. But from a change in how this works, how do you like what you see enough for us to flip the old one off and flip this to be the new way? Is there something you would miss from, or to bring up the API site as it is now? This one required us to actually generate the data for all of these runs, and it took a while. And this approach shows what endpoints were there at the time of the release, versus our new approach only looks at endpoints that still exist today, not that were deprecated, that were still there at these earlier releases. So when we look at the technical debt for 1.9, for example, or even any endpoints that don't exist in 1.19 are not in the new data because we're not interested in them from a coverage perspective.
I think that's okay.
Okay.
I'll admit, I'm not thinking through that deeply, but again, for me, like what you just showed me is far more actionable than what we have right now, in terms of helping us understand, what debt should we be paying down.
Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah.
Close all of these out. So those are Zach's two topics. Rion, I can take notes for you during this one, but you had some release metadata and conformance tests, and we have another gate that we're creating for the CNCF Kate's conformance repo. So I'll let you speak to this, Rion.
Okay. If you look at the information in this PR, you will see there is several endpoints that does not have metadata that actually give the release date. So to what release the test is working to.
Okay.
So the idea is that we need to update using the gate this data. So we did throw it out in the channel, and we did suggest that the date that would be generated would be the date as when it went to conformance.
We have another issue that we're working on for the CNCF Kate's conformance repo, and we need to know the exact list of tests that we need to ensure are in the submitted runs for Sonovoid. And this came up that we don't have that list in a form that's easily accessible in the logs in full form. So my suggestion was to use current tooling used to generate the conformance YAML and rerun it against 117, 116, and 115. I don't think we need it for 114 for this work, but it might be useful to take that same approach and generate it all the way back to 1.9 so that we have correct conformance YAML files so that we know when that was introduced and that the current one for, in this case, where we have 17 tests without a release. And then if we do update that, does that mean that people submitting test results for 1.16, 17, that they may have a new test that they need to have passed?
Well, I mean, these, I don't feel like that would invalidate any previous conformance things. Like we don't select based on that release field when we run conformance tests. We select on the conformance tag.
Yeah.
So there's that. Like, I feel like if you were to go through the Git history for all these files and figure out when these tests were added and like update and add the release field in master. So great, we've done the archaeology. We now know when those tests were added in master. And we can generate a conformance YAML, and it is up to date now because it diffs correctly against what's in our tests. If you were to cherry pick just the conformance YAML back into earlier branches, that wouldn't work. So you'd have to cherry pick sort of the changes to the test comments back to earlier releases. And I start to wonder if that's valuable, if that's worth the cost of cherry picking. It may very well be, but yeah.
Aaron, I don't think it's worth cherry picking back into old releases.
Yeah.
The only reason we're going back to 1.15 was because I think that's the earliest release that you can still get a conformance, or a little bit. We would do a one-time run to it's kind of like the easy way to do the archaeology. It's just to go through and check those out and run the current tooling, and then do a diff to make sure that we update these 17 tests with the correct release and put it as a PR against master. But I just wanted to verify that the approach we're using sounds okay, because there were some different thoughts around when to add that. But
I think with the conformance doc generator, we used to pick any conformance tests that are not tagged correctly. So the tool should produce that starting 1.14 or 1.15. So that's probably.
Okay. Well, I think if you're asking the approach of let's go through let's do the archaeology and let's add a release field to the comment in master, I think that sounds great. I would maybe go a step further and update our job to like consider anything that doesn't have a release field to be invalid, so that we don't get any more of these.
sounds good. We're doing something similar for the product.yaml for the conformance submissions to verify that those fields are all present, including the release, and verifying that the title of the PR, the version number in the product YAML, the version number and the results matches, so that we're not including the test. It's just to give the approver, who's human, the quick eyes to go, yes, all tests for this very specific release that we know is listed in the title, and it's all there. And we'll go through and add this to the job where we verify. I think there's a verify conformance YAML, and we just run the generator and ensure that it's the same. So if we update the generator to fail, if it's missing all of the data, would that be an easy approach?
Yes.
Okay, then that seems the simplest way to meet that need. We'll do that. Any other thoughts on the release metadata formats missing?
Not at the moment. This is making me want to get to the discussion on profiles more.
All right.
So I think on the endpoints with low priority, unfortunately, because it has the phrase low priority in it, it was a low priority for me to review it. I will try taking a look today after this meeting because I'm kind of free to like process some stuff after this. So I will take a look. I may not be the authority to rule absolutely yes or no. I might need to pull in folks like John or Clayton, and since they're not around, it may be some time to get a response on that. So I think it's more important that you keep asking us, like, is this important? How about this? Is this important? So that you know, at least for the stuff you're getting ready to work on, that you're getting ready to work on the right stuff.
Will do. Take it away, Aaron. Tell us about specifying and validating profiles. I'll pull that up on the share screen.
Yeah, thank you. So, okay. So basically this boils down to, I'd like the ability to specify the different sets of tests. All right, hang on, let me back up. Conformance, as we know, is supposed to test everything that is non-optional and GA. And we've talked about the idea of having profiles where we could describe how there's additional functionality that a Kubernetes cluster has that's not necessarily available by default on all Kubernetes clusters. So this would allow us to do things like have a profile to express persistent storage or something of that nature. So today we rely on a single test tag or a single like well-known string embedded in the test name called conformance. And that's how we decide whether or not a test belongs to the suite of conformance tests. So I want to be able to specify which tests belong to which like set of tests for a given profile. I want to be able to restrict how we specify like which test goes to which profile in the same manner that we currently restrict which tests are allowed to be promoted to conformance. And I need to be able to validate that, you know, whatever test run that Sonobuoy produces, I should be able to take a look at that and say like, your tests, like you pass this profile and this profile and this profile. Does that make sense? So those are the absolute must-haves for this. Some things that would be nice. I feel like if we take a look at the current set of conformance tests, some of them do things that not everybody would like to be allowed. So some of the tests do things that require like cluster admin privileges, or they do destructive things, things like that. And so I think we're probably going to be interested in taking a look at the existing suite of conformance tests and then like choosing a smaller subset of that and calling that our base profile. And then every profile beyond that would be sort of additive onto the base profile. So we feel like the existing set of conformance tests maybe actually corresponds to like, I don't know, 2 or 3 different profiles, something like that. So it might be nice to be able to say like, hey, if you certified your Kubernetes offering as conformant for a previously released version of Kubernetes, it would be nice for us to be able to say, actually, that means you fit, you can now say that you have these profiles as we sort of constrain what the base of conformance is, right? It'd be nice to be able to expand what people got as a result of passing that slightly larger set of tests. So that's a nice to have. Another nice to have would be to be able to define these lists of tests, you know, which test belongs to which profile out of the Kubernetes tree. This is basically because the Kubernetes tree is incredibly slow and painful to merge into. We might have a much faster merge velocity if we could get that out of tree. And that could allow us to, you know, potentially, it sort of ties back to the earlier point, we're maybe decoupled from the Kubernetes release lifecycle and could sort of retroactively specify things. Ideally, the way that we specify profiles should allow us to, when we're choosing which tests to run, it would be great if we could specify only run the set of tests that correspond to this profile or this profile, right? That's not a hard requirement because I'm thinking of the use case where like, I just want to be able to run all the tests and then I want to have a tool tell me like what profiles did I pass.
Yep.
Okay, so with those requirements and constraints in mind, the first idea I had on how to implement this was to add another field to the comment string above conformance tests, call it profiles, and it would be a list of profiles that this test belongs to. I'm not yet sure at the moment whether profiles would be exclusive. That is to say, if a test is part of profile A, it cannot be a part of profile B. I'm allowing for the possibility that a test could belong both to profile A and profile B. But I think that, you know, understanding that would only come out of deciding what those profiles should actually be, like concretely, what do we want to call them and how do we want to cluster things together. So I would continue to keep the conformance tag. And I would say that all tests, regardless of whether they're destined for the base profile, which follows the same sort of constraints we're using now, only, you know, only non-optional features, all tests have to use the conformance tag, even if they're part of a profile. If they're part of a profile, but so like we have checking right now that says you can't skip if you're part of a conformance test. That's how we sort of enforce the non-optional part of it. I would remove that and say you are actually allowed to skip even if you're a conformance test. And this would allow tests written for a certain profile, for certain optional functionality, to be able to check if they can do their thing.
Yeah.
So, hey, if there are no persistent volume storage classes present, I'm not even going to bother trying to test persistent storage. And so, like I said, this was designed with the use case in mind of running all your conformance tests up front and then verify which profiles you actually fulfilled afterwards. So the idea would be to implement a tool to do this out of the Kubernetes tree and use as a source of truth files that live outside of the Kubernetes tree. So for grins, I'm just assuming we added, for the behavior stuff, we added something called kubeconform. So let's pretend there's a new command line thing called kubeconform and it lives over in Kubernetes SIGs. And so I could run that as like a command line tool. It's a kubeconform validate, and then I would say, what version am I trying to validate for? And here's the JUnit file that I got from my Sonaboy run. And then I can see like, it'll spit out like which profiles did you pass, you know, okay, great. You did the base profile and you did the foo profile. Going further than that, I think it would be ideal to offer this as a service through the Kubernetes project. It might be like an API, or it could be something as simple as like a static web page that you upload something to and it spits out the response back to you. But, you know, sort of further reinforcing that the definition of what conformance is part of the Kubernetes project and offered as a service by the Kubernetes project. And so, like I said, the source of truth for like what are these profiles would be files that live out of the Kubernetes tree in a predefined directory structure that corresponds to the version of Kubernetes and then which profile it belongs to. And then you'd have like a list of tests. This would allow us to restrict addition of tests to different profiles, to different sets of reviewers. So maybe there's a really highly restricted set of reviewers for addition to the core profile, but then maybe there are a bunch of like storage subject matter experts who gate the addition of tests to the storage profile. So how would we flag, you know, tests for review and make sure that, you know, they're not getting promoted accidentally? So we would continue to use the conformance gate that we have today in tree, meaning we would still make sure if a test is tagged as conformance, that it's going to end up touching a file in a tree that's only reviewable by conformance approvers. And then periodically, we'll refresh the data that lives outside of Kubernetes. We'll use, again, pretend like we have a command line tool. We would like run kubeconform, generate profiles, what version am I generating for, and what's the Kubernetes tree that I'm going to walk. And then it would go through and it would walk the Kubernetes tree, and it would parse out the profile from the comments above the tests, and it would, regenerate all the profile lists, and then we could submit that as a pull request to the repo. In theory, this is something that could be just periodically done by a prow job or something.
Right.
So this does allow us to retroactively define profiles because it decouples the definition of what conformance is, like what the set of tests is, from the life cycle of the release. It doesn't necessarily change like what is the test actually exercising or doing. Would this play well with Sonobuoy? Because Sonobuoy is kind of the tool that most people use to certify whether or not they're conformant. Yes, this would require no change to the way people deploy Sonobuoy today. They would run it with the same default regular expression of conformance, and they would get out a JUnit file, which they could then hand off to this service. So it seems like the least invasive approach. The con, one of the big cons is like, I have no way to actually specify which, like if I just want to run the storage set of tests for the storage profile, I have no way of specifying that. And it kind of prevents me from doing like atomic gating stuff because things are now out of tree, right? So I couldn't necessarily say promote a feature to GA and also have it covered by the storage profile all in one go. I would sort of have to promote my storage feature to GA, and then I would sort of over here kind of update to have the profile of storage tests. On the plus side, there's really no churn around test names. So all of our existing tools like test grid and triage and stuff that base their history on test name, we wouldn't lose any history there. So there's that. Any questions so far?
For the generation of the profiles, I'm not sure I heard it, but it sounds that you're not to have the source of truth in tree. But I was wondering if it wouldn't make sense to have the profiles metadata and a list of profiles that test has, so that the tooling for generating your profile YAML is very, very similar to the process for generating our conformance YAML. While that would require some stuff in tree and allow us to, going forward, define that there, it sounds like one of your felt needs is for us to retroactively define profiles for stuff from 1.18 and earlier.
That would be nice to have. And yeah, I think my hope is that we would actually take all the code right now that like walks all the files and stuff and take that out of tree. And then we could just sort of like have a script that like installs that and runs that. So that, changes to what the metadata should contain, what it should look like, all of that lives out of tree, but we still have an in-tree gate on conformance.
Okay. On the Sonobuoy and the tooling, it's been a while since I've run it, but I remember there being a Sonobuoy website where you could go and say, I want to do a Sonobuoy test, and you click new, and it says, do kubectl apply this GUID.yaml. And if you did that, it would deploy the Sonobuoy and upload the results so that you had this dashboardy type thing.
Right.
And I wonder if we're going to put forth the effort to do that, if there's, let me see what you were calling it, SIG 8's kube conform, if there isn't a way to combine that work that we have with Sonobuoy for that website-y thing together with this validation process, with just pointing to your uploaded results, somehow verifying them via OAuth that company submitted the results via that process, so that the getting the shiny badge and all of that is so much cleaner.
Yeah.
Even if it does result in just a PR, but it's PR that the results were really run directly from the tool. I think some of the reason for that is some of the environments were completely offline and people wanted to upload stuff. I wonder how important that particular use case is, and if we were to open it up to see how much would just happen via something like kube conform apply or your kubectl apply this kubeconform.k8s.io GUID approach. Several thoughts there, but I just wanted to get them in the air.
Sure, I completely hear what you're saying. The ability to verify stuff offline, I think, is probably partially why right now the E2E test binary has the ability to list basically conformance.yaml. Like it's built in as a bin data artifact. So I could see kubeconform maybe being bundled inside of the conformance image that Sonobuoy uses, so that Sonobuoy has access to that binary directly, and it's one of the things that sort of Sonobuoy pre-downloads in that mode where it pre-downloads all of the images that are necessary for conformance testing.
Right.
So we could do something like that. And as far as integration with the service, that's why I was saying like, well, you know, it could be like another command line sort of thing, or it could just as easily be an API that we provide. So I feel like there are a number of different extension points that we could provide. Because yeah, that idea of taking the results that are generated by Sonobuoy is definitely a hard requirement. So I just wanted to sort of walk through some of the alternatives here. So if having all of the files out of tree feels way too, oh, go ahead.
When you mentioned this idea, you're trying to put the information into the metadata itself, right? So which kind of gives, it makes it difficult for people to see how much of the profile they ran and how much percentage of that is passing on their particular.
So the idea is, right, like with the default approach, they would just run all the conformance tests. And so we spit out like what profiles they passed. I could also see spitting out like, you didn't pass this profile because you didn't pass these tests.
Right.
Right.
But
so
how do you distinguish, like, you know, you don't pass 100% of your conformance tests in that case, right? I mean, you only pass like 70, 80% of the test case because profiles are, you know, part of the entire conformance suite.
Sorry, you cut out kind of in the beginning there, but my hope is like, if I were to suddenly wave a magic wand and have this apply to like 118 today, right? Like if you pass the existing set of conformance tests that have the tag conformance, you will absolutely pass the base profile for sure. Like, I guess maybe we can list that as a requirement. But like in trying to sort of reorganize things, you would definitely still be conformant at a base level. And optimally, if we're doing things right, you'd actually get additional profiles for like, I know Red Hat has always been kind of security conscious and kind of doesn't want tests that have like, you know, super user cluster admin access to the cluster. So we could maybe like say that's an additional profile. And then by having passed the conformance tests, you actually like fulfill both the base profile and that other profile.
I may be thinking it wrong, but let's say if I add all the node conformance tests to the conformance, right? That's a profile, no, or storage, whatever. And based on this plan, those will be part of the conformance tests. They will have the conformance tag. So they'll be run automatically whether that particular installation has storage capability or not.
Right.
So in that sense, you will not be able to run 100% of the conformance tests. There will be majority of the conformance tests that belong to a specific profile that will be failing on that.
Right.
So how do we distinguish that? I mean, do we need additional tooling to do that, or?
Yeah, the idea is I sort of proposed there's additional tooling out of tree, we'd call it kubeconform or something, that would take a look at the JUnit XML that's produced by your end-to-end test run, and it would spit out whether or not, you know, which profiles did you pass or not.
Yeah, it kind of is confusing in the sense that ET binary output is not really an indicator of whether I pass a conformance or not. So that's one thing. And the second thing I wanted to understand is how many profiles do we see possible Are there like a few or many?
So that's actually kind of out of the scope of what I want to discuss. I just want to discuss how we're implementing it. My personal preference would be to stick to as few as possible and no more. I always am kind of a fan of 7 plus or minus 2 as the magic number that humans can kind of hold in their head and reason about at one time. But ideally, it would be fewer than that. But I don't necessarily have the subject matter expertise to say how granular we need to make things.
The reason I'm asking is because that way you can even change, either you can overload the ginkgo or you can add tags to the test, right? I mean, if it is handful, that can be manageable.
Right. So those are some of the alternatives I considered down at the bottom, right?
Oh,
We could
sorry.
just do what we do already and like keep using tags and then just add like a profile foo tag. And then have regular expression support where it's like, oh, I just want to focus on conformance, the base profile, or the base profile and the storage profile. And I would continue to use the same tooling that we have today. So we'd still hit merge conflicts on a single file called conformance YAML, but we restrict access to it. The problem that this approach runs into is, number one, it's going to make the test names kind of illegible past a certain point. It's also going to end up renaming the majority of our tests, which means we lose test history. And yeah, it's just kind of, it sort of pushes our use of special strings in test names sort of past the limits of reasonable usability. So then I thought of like, what are 2 other options we could use to maybe support the use of or concept of tags a little more natively. So one thought is we could try like just wrapping Ginkgo and introducing our own concept of tags. The difficulty is Ginkgo doesn't expose enough functionality to be able to specify the line number. So if I were to wrap Ginkgo's like describe call and then do a whole bunch of magic to decide whether or not I should actually call that based on tags that were specified, Ginkgo is going to remember the line number of the utility function that I wrote to wrap it and not the actual line number of the test where the describe call was used, which means that if the test happens to fail, I will get line numbers that are not terribly useful. This information does appear in a stack trace that's sort of outside of the text that's currently captured in JUnit. It doesn't necessarily work very well with Ginkgo's JUnit reporter. The other option would be to see if we could get tags natively embedded in Ginkgo upstream. But unfortunately, I just don't think we have the time to land this within the 119 timeframe, though I'm going to kind of keep pushing that along. So going back up, for the solution I proposed to try and overcome some of these shortcomings, I know we're basically at time at this point, but I do propose other ways to, kind of like, if we're too uncomfortable having the files that we use to like figure out which tests are belong to which profile out of tree, we could go back to doing it in tree with conformance YAML, have it exactly as it is now, but add an additional field called profiles. The problem is we're kind of stuck with all of our in-tree merge velocity, and it's going to make it a lot trickier to kind of backport these changes. And then to be able to focus on a given profile or not, I also talk about the idea of adding additional flags to the E2E test binary, where we sort of hijack Ginkgo's focus and skip functionality, and instead say, if you use these flags, could you scroll down just a little bit, Chris? Where we say like, there, alter E2E test. So for either of those approaches, if I define the files externally, or I have it defined in tree, like use the conformance YAML file, and then I could add some flags to say, focus on this profile or focus on this other profile. I feel like that more directly addresses your concern, Srini, of like, I want to run the tests that I know will pass, which is maybe more user-friendly from the test execution perspective, right?
Yep.
But again, I somewhat feel like that's a nice to have if we instead provide some additional bit of tooling that you tack on to the end. So, okay, I see what, instead of like tests for alternate profiles failing, I would anticipate seeing them skip. And so I don't think you'd see a failed test run if you didn't support all of the profiles. You'd instead see a green test run with this many tests passing. But to figure out like which profiles that set of tests passed, you'd have to use another tool.
Yeah, I do like that. Yeah, I do like that. I mean, if we have a reserved set of words for skipping that we can control, then the gating can also help in that sense that, oh, you can only do these kind of skips because these belong to these profiles. That's doable, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, but we are at the top of the hour. So do you have a cap for this, or do you propose that we comment on this? How do we brainstorm?
Go ahead and comment on this. I'll send this out to the SIG Arch mailing list. And then, sort of once we've addressed comments, I would anticipate updating the profiles cap.
Sounds good. Thanks.
One quick note as we go. Part of our OKRs within the CNC APA Snoop repo for the work we're doing is gating the CNCF the CADES conformance repo. And so we are looking at that conformance YAML as making sure everybody runs their tests. And so we'll go ahead and fold that in. But the one that I hear, at least from Aaron, is the other major goal was to gate KK using our endpoints as a metric for that. And I'd love to find a way to get some broader feedback on that so that we're sure, because it's been set as a major goal. And if we're going to adjust that, I want to make sure that we've got clear direction from other folks as well. Aaron, I'd welcome.
Okay.
Welcome that.
Yeah.
I don't disagree.
Let's catch up on that offline.
Okay. Thank you everybody for attending. If anyone wants to stick around after, I'm fine with that. I'm going to stop the recording here.
Hooray.
Thank you.
I'm not saying it stopped yet. My computer's been super slow today, so let's just assume it's still running until I see the. I've just had it pop up and say stop.